You don't have a choice, Mom said, standing over me, her voice cutting through the silent room. I didn't know it yet, but my answer had already triggered something unstoppable that would expose everything they'd hidden from the room. My face burned. Mom stood over me at the oak table. They thought this was already settled. They thought I'd fold the way I always had. I wish I could say all began there, in that room with the folder and the witnesses and the slap still stinging on my cheek, but the truth is it started years before. It started weeks earlier, when Mom called on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at my apartment, folding laundry, half listening to the radio. Her voice was honey-sweet when I answered, the kind she used when she wanted something but didn't want to admit it yet, the kind that set my teeth on edge even before she spoke. We're getting everyone together this Sunday, she said, her tone light, almost casual. Just family. I think it's time we all got on the same page. I paused, a towel in my hands. What page? She laughed, as if I'd said something charming instead of direct. Just some housekeeping, nothing formal. We'll talk when you get here. I asked what kind of housekeeping. She deflected. I asked who would be there. She deflected again, the sweetness in her voice growing thinner. It's just family, she repeated. Don't overthink it. But I'd learned years ago that just family never meant what it was supposed to mean. In our house, it meant compliance dressed up as unity. It meant decisions already made, with my presence required only as decoration, as a signature on something someone else had already decided. I should have said no. I should have asked more questions. But some part of me, the part that still hoped things could be different, agreed to come. When I pulled into the driveway that Sunday afternoon, my stomach dropped. The street was packed with cars. I recognized my aunt's sedan, my uncle's truck, Paige's husband's SUV. Then cars. I only half recognized vehicles I'd seen at family gatherings but couldn't attach to specific names. A few I didn't know at all. I counted at least 8 parked along the curb, maybe more around the corner. This wasn't a casual family chat. This was an event. I sat in my car for a moment, hands still on the wheel, trying to steady my breathing. Every instinct told me to reverse out of the driveway and leave. But I knew what that would cost me. They'd call it dramatic. They'd say I was avoiding family. They'd use my absence as proof of whatever narrative they were already building. So I got out. Inside, the scent of lemon cleaner hit me first, sharp and chemical. Then roast chicken, the smell drifting from the kitchen. Underneath it all was the faint staleness of a house cleaned for an audience rather than lived in. The good dishes were out on the sideboard, the ones Mom only used for holidays or when she wanted to impress someone. The folding chairs, the ones usually kept in the garage, were set up in neat rows facing the oak table where Dad usually spread his paperwork and paid bills. I counted the people as I walked in. Extended family scattered near the windows. Church acquaintances I recognized but barely knew, clustered by the kitchen. A few faces I couldn't quite place at all. Roughly 23 people total, maybe more if I counted the ones half hidden in the hallway. And there, in the center of it all, Paige sat at the oak table. Her shoulders were back. Her expression was calm. Practiced. She'd dressed for this, I realized. A pressed blouse. Minimal jewelry. The kind of outfit that said serious without trying too hard. She looked like she'd been rehearsing. Near the fireplace, Mr. Bennett stood with his briefcase open, pen already in hand. I recognized him immediately. He'd handled my parents' wills, their property transfers, small legal matters over the years. He was family adjacent, the kind of lawyer who showed up at Christmas parties and knew everyone's names. This wasn't just family. This was theater. Dad cleared his throat and raised one hand. The murmurs in the room died instantly. Everyone turned toward him, attentive, expectant. He had that effect. He'd always had that effect. When he spoke, people listened. When he decided something, it became real. "Thanks for coming," he said, his voice steady and measured. "Rehearsed. This won't take long. We've got some family business to handle, and I think it's best we're all here to see it through." He reached for something on the chair beside him and pulled out a thick folder. The plastic sleeve on top caught the light as he slid it across the table toward me. It landed with a soft thud that felt heavier than it should have. I stared at it for a moment before reaching out. Through the clear plastic, I could see pages, lots of them. Printed text in dense paragraphs, tables, numbers. "We're simplifying things," Dad continued. His tone was calm, matter of fact, like he was explaining a household repair instead of dismantling my life. "Consolidating family assets under one management structure. It makes sense for everyone. Cleaner, more efficient, less complicated down the road." I opened the folder. The first page was a valuation summary. Line items listed properties, accounts, investments, and at the bottom, bolded and underlined, a total. $9.8 million. The number appeared again on the second page. Then the third. Each time in a slightly different context, each time just as impossible to ignore. "Everything transfers to Paige," Dad said. He gestured toward my sister without looking at her. "She'll handle the management going forward. It's cleaner this way. One decision maker, one point of contact, no confusion." I looked up. The room was watching me, not with concern, with expectation, like they were waiting for me to nod, to agree, to reach for the pen Mr. Bennett was probably already holding. Someone near the back shifted in their chair. The sound was soft, but it carried in the silence. "It makes sense," Mom added, her voice gentle now, coaxing. "Paige has always been good with these things. And you've got your own life, your own career. This way you don't have to worry about it." The room exhaled. Nods. Murmurs of agreement. Someone said something about family coming first. Someone else said something about keeping things simple, not surprise, relief. Like they'd all been holding their breath, waiting for me to make this easy for them. I looked down at the folder again, at the signature line, printed in blank and waiting for me at the bottom of page 7. I closed it. "I'm not signing," I said. The words came out calm, steady, not loud, not aggressive, just clear. The kind of voice I'd learned to use in the field when I needed to assess a situation before acting, when panic would only make things worse. The room went still. Paige's composure flickered. Just for a second. Her eyes widened slightly, her hands unfolded from the table, and then she caught herself and smoothed her expression back into place. Mom moved first. She pushed her chair back and surged toward me, her face twisting into something I'd seen before, but never this raw, never this public. "You're being selfish," she hissed, her voice low and sharp. "This is about family. This is about what's best for everyone, not just you." "I'm not signing," I repeated. "You don't get to. I'm not signing." Mom's hand came up fast. I saw it in my peripheral vision, but I didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't turn away. The slap cracked through the room like a gunshot. My cheek burned, my eyes watered. The sound echoed in my ears, sharp and final and impossible to take back. Gasps rippled through the chairs. Someone whispered something I couldn't make out. Another person stood, then sat back down. The whispers grew louder, but I couldn't separate the voices, couldn't tell who was speaking or what they were saying. I stayed still. I didn't raise my hand to my face. I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice. I focused on my breathing. Slow, controlled, in through my nose, out through my mouth. I'd learned that in training during the first weeks when everything felt like too much, when I didn't think I'd make it through. I learned how to stay calm when everything around you wanted to escalate, how to find the center of yourself and hold on to it. And I prayed, silently, with my eyes open, with Mom still standing over me and the room still frozen in shock. I prayed for the restraint to hold my ground without giving them what they wanted. Not retaliation, not anger, just clarity. The heat in my face started to fade, my breathing evened out. And I waited. Mr. Bennett stepped forward from his spot near the fireplace. His expression was careful, neutral, but I saw something shift in his eyes, something that looked like concern or maybe calculation. "Let's slow down," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the room, cutting through the whispers. "There are some clarifications we need to address before we proceed." Dad's face darkened. He turned toward Mr. Bennett, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "What clarifications?" he snapped. "This is straightforward. We've discussed this. Everyone here understands what needs to happen." Mom tried to speak over him, her voice rising again, but Mr. Bennett raised one hand. It was a small gesture, almost gentle, but it stopped her mid-sentence. "With respect," he said, his tone careful, measured, "I need to ask a procedural question. For the record." He turned to me. The room followed his gaze. "Do you know who holds authority over these assets?" The question hung in the air, simple, direct, impossible to misunderstand. I met his eyes. "I do." The room shifted. Not loud, not dramatic, just a murmur, a ripple of confusion spreading from one row of chairs to the next. People leaned toward each other. Whispers started again, quieter this time, uncertain. Paige leaned forward, her hands flat on the table. "That's not possible," she said. Her voice was thin now, missing the certainty it had carried before. "Mom and Dad have always managed." "They don't," I said. I kept my voice level, factual. "You're asking me to sign away something you don't control." Dad stood, his chair scraped against the floor. "This is ridiculous. We're your parents. These are family assets. You don't get to just—" "I'm not the one who decided that," I said. "Someone else did. A long time ago." Mom's face went pale, then red. "What are you talking about, Grandma?" I said. The name dropped into the room like a stone into still water. The ripples spread. More whispers. Someone near the back stood and moved toward the door. Paige's husband, who'd been leaning against the wall near the kitchen, straightened and stared at Paige. "You told me this was settled," he said to her, his voice low but audible. She didn't answer. She was staring at me, her expression shifting from confusion to something sharper. Anger, maybe. Or fear. Dad opened his mouth to speak, but Mr. Bennett cut him off. "If I may," he said, "I was the child everyone assumed would be fine. Paige was 3 years older, louder, quicker to push back. When she wanted something, she made noise until she got it. When she disagreed, she argued. When she felt ignored, she made sure everyone knew. She had tantrums that shook the house. She slammed doors. She raised her voice until someone paid attention. And it worked. People listened to Paige because Paige made it impossible not to listen. I was quieter. I watched. I waited. I learned early, maybe too early, that raising my voice didn't get me heard. It just got me dismissed. It got me labeled as dramatic, as difficult, as ungrateful for whatever small thing I'd been given. I remember being maybe 7 or 8, asking if I could take art classes, the kind where you actually learn technique, not just the free-for-all sessions at the community center. Paige had been taking piano for 2 years by then, private lessons. A teacher who came to the house. Mom said we couldn't afford both, that I should wait, that maybe next year. Next year never came. But Paige got voice lessons added to her piano lessons. Because Paige asked louder. Because Paige made it clear she wouldn't accept no. So I stopped trying. When Paige wanted the bigger bedroom, the one with the window seat and the better closet, I moved to the smaller one without complaint. I packed my things into boxes and carried them down the hall and unpacked them in a room half the size. Mom thanked me for being mature about it. Dad said I was making the right choice, that it was good to put family harmony first. Nobody asked if I wanted to move. They just assumed I would. When holidays meant Paige got to choose the schedule and I had to adjust mine, I adjusted. I switched shifts at work. I changed plans with friends. I smiled and said it was fine, that I understood Paige's time was more complicated, more important, harder to accommodate. When family photos meant Paige stood in the center and I filled the edges, I smiled on cue. I learned where to stand, how to angle my body so I didn't block anyone more important, how to tilt my head just right, how to make myself smaller so she could take up more space, so she could be the one people looked at first. Mom and Dad called me easy, low maintenance, the one they didn't have to worry about. Their phrases became my identity. She's so easy, they'd tell relatives. Never any trouble. Paige called me boring, a pushover, the one who always gave in. What they didn't see, what none of them saw, was that I was paying attention. I was learning, not just how to survive in that house, but how to recognize patterns, how to see what people weren't saying, how to notice the difference between what they claimed and what they actually did. I joined the Army partly because it gave me structure, clear rules, clear expectations, clear consequences. But mostly, I joined because it gave me distance, physical distance from the house where I'd learned to make myself small, emotional distance from the constant pressure to fold, to accommodate, to disappear whenever someone louder needed the space. I worked as a medic. Basic training was hard, but it was fair. If you did the work, you advanced. If you failed, it was because of what you did, not because of who decided they liked someone else better. There was something clean about that, something I'd never had at home. I learned to assess situations quickly, to triage, to separate what was urgent from what was important, from what could wait. I learned to stay calm under pressure, to focus on the next right action instead of spiraling into panic. I learned to document everything, not just injuries and vitals, but patterns, causes and effects, the things people said versus the things they actually did. I learned that quiet didn't mean weak. That observation was a skill, not a flaw. That sometimes the person who talks the least sees the most. That training didn't stay in the field. It came home with me. It changed how I moved through the world. I started noticing things I'd been too young, or too tired, or too conditioned to notice before. The way Dad's stories about family legacy always centered on Paige, how she was going to carry on the name, manage the properties, make the family proud, how I was mentioned, if at all, as an afterthought, as supporting character in someone else's story. The way Mom's phone calls always included some version of your sister needs, but rarely asked what I needed, as if my needs were assumed to be smaller, simpler, less urgent, as if I didn't need anything at all. The way extended family treated me like wallpaper and Paige like the main event, how they'd ask her about her plans, her opinions, her thoughts, while I stood 3 feet away and might as well have been invisible. I noticed, and I started keeping track, not in a journal or a spreadsheet, just in my head. Mental notes about who said what, who promised what, who followed through and who didn't, who asked questions and who just assumed, who saw me and who looked through me. I learned to recognize patterns, to see the difference between someone who was genuinely interested and someone who was just being polite, to notice when a question was really a test, a way of measuring whether I'd resist or comply. And slowly, over years, I built something inside myself that couldn't be taken away. A certainty about what was real and what was performance, about what I deserved and what I'd just been taught to accept. I didn't know it then, but I was preparing, building the foundation I'd need when my grandmother handed me something worth protecting. She left behind a trust, a significant one, more money than I'd ever imagined our family having. And she left it in my name, not Paige's, mine. I didn't know why at first. We hadn't been especially close. She'd lived 3 hours away, visited maybe twice a year, sent cards on birthdays and holidays. She'd been quiet like me, prone to watching rather than performing. She'd sit in the corner during family gatherings, a cup of tea in her hands, observing while everyone else talked. But she'd paid attention, just like I had. The lawyer who handled her estate called me on a Tuesday. He explained the trust, the terms, the assets. He used words like irrevocable and designated authority and fiduciary responsibility. I wrote them all down. Your grandmother was very specific about the structure, he said. She wanted to make sure you understood the protections she'd built in. Protections from what? I asked. He paused. from family pressure, from coercion. She was concerned that without clear documentation, certain family members might try to override your authority. I sat with that for a long time after the call ended. My grandmother had known. She'd seen the same patterns I'd seen, and she'd done something about it. The documents arrived a week later, thick envelopes with law firm letterhead, pages and pages of legal language and terms I had to read 3 times to fully understand. I spread them out on my kitchen table, working through them section by section, highlighting passages that seemed important, making notes in the margins when something didn't make sense. The core was simple. I held decision-making authority over the trust. Not Mom, not Dad, not Paige. The trust couldn't be dissolved without my consent. It couldn't be transferred without my signature. And the documentation explicitly stated that authority rested with me, regardless of family pressure, regardless of anyone's opinion about what I should do with it. My grandmother had written it that way on purpose. She'd included clauses specifically designed to prevent the kind of pressure I'd grown up with, clauses that invalidated any decision made under duress, clauses that required independent legal review before any major changes could be made, clauses that explicitly stated no family member could claim authority based on age, relationship, or tradition. She'd thought of everything, every angle, every possible way someone might try to manipulate or override me. She'd built a fortress around it. And she'd put me inside. I didn't tell anyone right away. I read the documents twice, then a third time. I highlighted sections. I made notes in the margins. I called the trustee, a man named Walter who'd worked with my grandmother for 20 years, and asked him to walk me through every clause. "Your grandmother wanted you to be prepared," he said. "She knew there might come a day when someone would ask you to sign something. She wanted you to know you didn't have to." "Did she say why she chose me?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. "She said you were the one who listened, the one who paid attention. She said Paige was loud enough that people would hear her no matter what. But you'd learn to be quiet to survive. She didn't want you to lose yourself in that." I felt something crack open in my chest when he said that. Not sadness, something else. Recognition, maybe. Or validation. The feeling that someone had seen me when I thought I'd been invisible. I asked Walter what I should do, whether I should tell my family, whether I should prepare for pushback. "That's your decision," he said. "But if I were you, I'd wait, see what happens. People show you who they are when they think they have power over you. Your grandmother understood that." So I waited. I kept the documents in a folder in my apartment. I read them periodically, making sure I understood every clause, every protection. I memorized the key sections, and I prepared for the day someone would ask. But preparing wasn't just about knowing the legal terms. It was about preparing myself. There was one evening, maybe 2 weeks before the meeting, when I sat at my kitchen table with the documents spread out in front of me, the trust agreement, the authority designation, the clauses about coercion, all of it laid out like battle plans. I knew what was coming. I could feel it building. And part of me wanted to run, to pack up the documents, to pretend I'd never seen them, to show up at that meeting and sign whatever they wanted, just to make it stop. Before I opened the stack to review it one more time, I paused. I closed my eyes. I prayed for wisdom instead of certainty, for peace instead of control. I asked for the strength to hold firm if that's what was right, and the humility to recognize if I was wrong. I didn't want to be stubborn for the sake of being stubborn. I wanted to be clear. When I opened my eyes, the documents were still there, still real, still mine to decide about. I read through them again, slower this time, and I realized my grandmother hadn't just given me legal protection. She'd given me permission. Permission to say no, permission to hold boundaries, permission to believe I deserved to protect what was mine. That's when I knew I wouldn't fold. It took 18 months. At first, the mentions were subtle, casual comments from Mom about Paige's plans, about how she was thinking about the future, about how nice it would be if family assets could be simplified. Dad would chime in with vague talk about legacy and responsibility, about how important it was to keep things consolidated to avoid unnecessary complications. I listened. I nodded. I didn't commit to anything. Then the comments became more frequent, more pointed. Mom would call and mention how stressed Paige was, how much she was trying to manage, how helpful it would be if certain things could be streamlined. Dad would bring it up during visits, framing it as practical, as obvious, as something any reasonable person would understand. Paige herself didn't say much at first, she just watched. She'd always been good at that, at waiting until the ground was prepared before making her move. But I could see it in the way she looked at me during family dinners, in the questions she'd ask about my work, my schedule, my plans. She was measuring, calculating. The pressure built slowly, like water rising behind a dam. A comment here, a suggestion there. A conversation that circled around the same idea without ever stating it directly. And then came the phone call about the Sunday meeting. I knew what it was before I walked in. I'd seen this pattern too many times not to recognize it. They were going to stage it. Use public pressure. Witnesses. The appearance of consensus. They assumed I'd fold the way I always had. But this time, I'd come prepared. A week before the meeting, I'd called Mr. Bennett myself. I'd used a number on his business card, the one he'd given me years ago at some family event I barely remembered. When he answered, I was direct. "I need to send you some documents," I said, "for review." Before Sunday. There was a pause. What kind of documents? Trust documents, authority designations. I think my parents are planning to ask me to sign something at this meeting. I want to make sure you understand what you're actually being asked to facilitate. Another pause, longer this time. I see. I sent the documents that afternoon, scanned copies of everything, the trust terms, the authority designations, the clauses about duress and independent review. Everything my grandmother had built in. Mr. Bennett called me back 2 days later. "Your parents didn't mention any of this," he said. His voice was careful, neutral, but I could hear the shift in his tone, the realization settling in. "I know," I said. "They asked me to prepare transfer paperwork. They said it was a family decision, that everyone was on board. They assumed I would be," I said. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "What do you need from me?" "I need you to ask the right questions," I said, "when they try to move forward. I need you to make sure everyone in that room understands what they're actually asking me to do." He agreed. Not enthusiastically, but he agreed. I think part of him was curious. Part of him wanted to see what would happen when the truth came out. So when I sat down at that oak table and watched Dad slide the folder toward me, I already knew what was inside. I knew what they were going to ask. I knew the pressure they'd apply. I knew the witnesses they'd gathered. And I knew exactly what would happen when I said no. The slap had been worse than I'd expected, not the physical pain, though my cheeks still burned. The humiliation. The public nature of it. The gasps from the room, the whispers that spread like fire, the way no one moved to stop her. No one stood up. No one said her name or told her to stop. They just watched. And in that moment, I understood something I'd known intellectually, but never felt so completely. They weren't going to help me. They weren't here to protect me or support me or make sure I was treated fairly. They were here to witness my compliance, to add weight to the pressure, to make it impossible for me to say no without looking like the villain. But I'd stayed still. I'd focused on my breathing, on the prayers I'd learned to use when everything felt like too much. I'd prayed for restraint instead of retaliation, for clarity instead of anger, and I'd waited for Mr. Bennett to do what we'd discussed. He didn't disappoint. "I need to clarify something," Mr. Bennett said, louder now, cutting through the murmurs and whispers. He walked to the table, set his briefcase down, and pulled out a document. It was stapled, official-looking, with a blue cover sheet that caught the light. "This is the trust authority designation," he said, holding it so the room could see. "Filed 2 years ago, upon the death of the grantor." Dad reached for it. Mr. Bennett let him take it, then pulled out a second copy for himself. It names your daughter as the sole decision-maker, Mr. Bennett continued, his voice calm but firm. Not you, not your wife, not Paige. The authority to manage, distribute, or transfer these assets rests entirely with her. The room went completely quiet. Not the quiet of people waiting to speak. The quiet of people realizing they'd walked into something they didn't understand. Dad stared at the document in his hands. His face went red, then pale. Mom leaned over his shoulder, reading, her mouth moving silently as she tried to process what she was seeing. Paige leaned forward across the table, her hands reaching for the document. That can't be right, she said, her voice sharp. Grandma wouldn't have. She did, Mr. Bennett said. He looked at me, then back at the room. The designation is clear, irrevocable. The authority was granted specifically to prevent the kind of transfer you're requesting today, relatives whispered. The sound grew, spreading through the rows of chairs like wind through trees. Someone near the back stood and moved toward the door. An aunt, maybe, or a cousin. I couldn't tell. They left without saying anything, the door clicking shut behind them. Paige's husband pushed off from the wall where he'd been standing. He stared at Paige, his face hard. You told me this was settled, he said. His voice was low, but it carried in the silence. You said it was just paperwork, that she'd agreed. Paige didn't answer. She was still staring at the document, her hands gripping the edge of the table. I never agreed, I said. Dad found his voice. We're her parents, he said, his tone desperate now, scrambling. These are family assets. She can't just decide. She can, Mr. Bennett said, cutting him off. And legally she already has. The authority was designated by the grantor. Your daughter? The trust terms are explicit. Without her consent, there is no transfer. There is no consolidation. There is nothing to sign. Mom turned to me, her expression shifting through anger, disbelief, something close to betrayal. You planned this, she said, her voice shaking. You planned this whole thing. You let us think. No, I said. I kept my voice level. I just didn't ignore what was already in place. You assumed. You didn't ask. We're your family, Mom said, after everything we've done for you. You're asking me to give away $9.8 million, I said. To someone who isn't me, without discussing it, without asking what I wanted. You assumed I'd sign because you told me to. Dad tried again, his voice rising. This is about loyalty, about family, about doing what's right for everyone, not just yourself. Then you should have talked to me first, I said, instead of staging a performance. Mr. Bennett packed the document back into his briefcase. The transfer you're requesting has no legal path, he said. He looked at Dad, then Mom, then the room. There's nothing to sign. The meeting is over. People started leaving. First one, then two, then whole groups. Extended family. I barely knew, gathered their coats and purses and slipped out the door without making eye contact. Church acquaintances murmured polite goodbyes that didn't include my name. The rows of folding chairs emptied one by one until only a handful of people remained. Paige's husband left first. He walked past her without a word, his expression closed off, his movements deliberate. She called his name once. He didn't stop. Mr. Bennett closed his briefcase with a soft click. He looked at me, nodded once, then walked toward the door. I'll follow up tomorrow, he said, with the documentation you'll need. Thank you, I said. He paused at the threshold. You handled that well, he added, quieter now, meant just for me. I didn't feel like I'd handled anything well. I felt exhausted, hollowed out, like I'd been holding my breath for hours and had only just remembered how to breathe. I stood. My legs felt unsteady, but I made myself move toward the door. No one stopped me. Dad had his back to me, his hands braced against the oak table, his head down. Mom was crying, quiet sobs that shook her shoulders. Paige sat frozen in her chair, staring at nothing. I walked past all of them, through the living room with its folding chairs and good dishes, through the entryway that still smelled like lemon cleaner. out the door and down the driveway to where I'd parked my car hours ago, back when I'd thought I might be able to explain myself to make them understand. Muffled voices drifted from the house behind me. I heard Dad's voice rise, then Mom's, then nothing. I got in my car and sat there for a moment, my hands on the wheel, the key in the ignition but not turned. I prayed, not for them, for me. I prayed to stay firm without turning it into revenge, to hold the boundaries I'd just drawn without using them as weapons, to let the truth be enough without needing to twist the knife. It would have been so easy to go back in there to list every slight, every dismissal, every time they'd chosen Paige over me, to make them feel what I'd felt. But that wasn't what I wanted. I just wanted them to stop. I started the car and drove home. The streets were quiet. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the pavement. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't call anyone. I just drove. When I got to my apartment, I dropped my keys on the counter and sat on the couch. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat there in the dimness, feeling the weight of the day settle into my bones. That night, I slept more deeply than I had in weeks. No nightmares. No waking up at 3 a.m. replaying conversations. Just sleep, dark and heavy and dreamless. The next morning, Mr. Bennett called. The tone was different, more respectful, less performative, like he was talking to a client instead of someone's difficult daughter. There are some adjustments we'll need to make, he said. Documentation, verification. I want to confirm your parents' assumptions about ongoing access won't hold up under formal review. I know, I said. I'll send you the updated paperwork by end of week, he said. If you have questions, call me directly. Paige called that afternoon. Then again that evening. Then, the next morning, 6 times in 3 days. I didn't answer. I didn't listen to the voicemails. I just watched the notifications pile up and felt nothing. A group chat I'd been added to months ago suddenly came alive. Messages poured in, each one angrier than the last. Someone said Dad was humiliated. Someone else said Mom hadn't stopped crying. A third voice said this wasn't what Grandma would have wanted, that family was supposed to come first, that I'd turned into someone they didn't recognize. I read through the messages once, slowly, carefully, noting who said what, who stayed silent, who piled on. Then I muted the chat. Within 48 hours, I made my first calls. I hired an independent management firm, one that specialized in trust administration and had no connection to my family or their network. I explained the situation in clinical terms, the pressure, the staged meeting, the assumption of access. They understood immediately. You're not the first person to deal with this, the lead administrator said. Her name was Margaret. She had 20 years of experience and a voice that made it clear she didn't tolerate manipulation. We'll lock everything down. Standard protocols. Dual authentication. Oversight measures. No one accesses anything without your explicit approval. Within a week, the accounts were restructured. New passwords, new verification systems, new maintenance schedules that didn't rely on family access or family assumptions about what they were entitled to. Paige's discretionary spending stopped first. The credit cards she'd been using, the ones tied to the trust accounts, were flagged for irregular activity. When she tried to use them, they were declined, then frozen pending review. Her husband moved out 2 weeks later. I heard about it third hand through a cousin who called to yell at me about ruining Paige's marriage. He'd filed for separation, citing misrepresentation and financial deception. Apparently, Paige had told him the trust was settled, that the money was guaranteed, that they could plan around it. She'd been wrong. My parents' situation unraveled more slowly but just as thoroughly. The lake house they'd been planning to keep, the one they talked about retiring to, went up for sale. Then the second car, the newer one, Dad had bought to impress the neighbors. Then some of Mom's jewelry, pieces she'd inherited from her own mother. They moved to a smaller place across town, a rental, 2 bedrooms instead of 4, no garage, no yard. I heard about it secondhand through the same cousin who'd called to yell. She'd softened her tone by then, less angry and more confused. "Did you know they were selling the lake house?" she'd asked. "No," I'd said. "They're saying they have to, that they can't afford it anymore." I didn't respond. There wasn't anything to say. A month after the meeting, Mom sent an envelope to my apartment. No return address, but I recognized her handwriting. Inside was a single piece of paper folded once with a message written in blue ink. "We need to talk." I set it on the counter. I didn't respond. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I wasn't sure. 3 months later, Paige showed up outside my building. I was coming home from work, my bag over my shoulder, keys in my hand. She was standing near the entrance, leaning against the brick wall like she'd been waiting. When she saw me, she straightened. She looked different. Smaller somehow, though her height hadn't changed. Thinner. Her face was drawn, the angles sharper than I remembered. The composure she'd worn like armor at the meeting that practiced calm was completely gone. "We need to talk," she said. I stopped a few feet away. "No, we don't. You ruin everything," she said. Her voice cracked on the last word. I felt something twist in my chest. Not guilt, something closer to pity. But I didn't let it show. "No," I said. "I stopped letting you take everything." "That's not fair. Neither was that room," I said. "Or the folder. Or the assumption that I'd sign because you asked. Or because Mom slapped me. Or because 23 people were watching." She flinched. "I didn't know she was going to do that," Paige said. "But you knew what the meeting was for," I said. "You knew they were going to pressure me. You sat there and let it happen. You were part of it." She opened her mouth, closed it, looked away. "I'm done being quiet so you can be loud," I said. "I'm done making myself smaller so you can take up more space. I'm done pretending that's normal." The silence between us stretched out. Cars passed on the street behind her. Someone walked by with a dog. The world kept moving while we stood there. Years of unspoken resentment finally said out loud. "I didn't think you'd actually do it," she finally said. Her voice was soft now, almost a whisper. "I thought you'd fold. You always did before." "I know," I said. That was the problem. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she turned and walked away. No goodbye, no apology, just the sound of her footsteps fading down the sidewalk. I watched her go. The silence that followed felt clean, full of boundaries. Final in a way that felt right. It was another 4 months before Dad reached out. The message came through text, brief and formal. "Can we meet, just you and me? I'd like to talk." I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to delete it, to let the silence stand. But another part, the part that still remembered being his daughter before all of this, was curious. I agreed. But I chose the location. A diner we used to go to when I was younger, back before everything got complicated. Vinyl booths, worn counter, coffee that tasted the same no matter who made it. Neutral ground. He was already there when I arrived, sitting in a booth near the back. He looked older. The certainty he'd always carried, that absolute confidence that he was right and everyone else would eventually see it, was missing. He sat with his shoulders slightly hunched, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee he wasn't drinking. I slid into the booth across from him. "Thanks for coming," he said. I nodded. Didn't say anything. The waitress came by, asked if I wanted coffee. I said yes. She poured it and left. "I'd been thinking a lot," Dad said. He stared down at his mug. "About that day, about what happened, about how we got there." I waited. "I was wrong," he said. The words came out quiet, almost reluctant, like they'd been stuck in his throat for months. "I confused authority with responsibility. I thought because I was your father, because I'd always made decisions for this family, that I got to decide this too. I didn't ask. I just assumed." "You did," I said. He looked up at me. His eyes were tired. "I treated your silence like consent. I always have. When you didn't argue, I thought that meant you agreed. I didn't see that you'd just learned it was pointless to argue." I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but recognition, the acknowledgement that he was finally seeing what I'd been trying to show him for years. I taught Paige to do the same thing, he continued. I modeled it for her. Be loud. Be certain. Assume everyone else will fall in line. I turned her into a smaller version of me. We sat in silence for a moment. The diner hummed around us. The clink of dishes, the murmur of other conversations, the hiss of the coffee maker behind the counter. Why did Grandma leave it to me? I asked. Did she ever tell you? Dad shook his head. We didn't know about the trust, not the way she'd structured it. She'd always talked about leaving something for you girls, but she never mentioned the terms, never mentioned the authority designation. She knew, I said. She knew what would happen if she didn't protect it. Yeah, Dad said. His voice was rough. She did. We talked for another hour about childhood roles, about how Paige had learned to mirror him and I'd learned to disappear, about the patterns that had seemed normal until they weren't, about the ways he'd confused love with control and family with ownership. He didn't ask for the assets back. He didn't ask me to soften the boundaries I'd put in place. He didn't try to negotiate or find a compromise. He just acknowledged what had happened. Before he left, he said something I hadn't expected. I'm proud of you, he said. His voice was quiet but steady. You stood up for yourself. You didn't let us steamroll you. I should have said that earlier. I should have taught you to do that instead of trying to break you when you did. His hand touched my shoulder, tentative, uncertain, like he wasn't sure if I'd pull away. I didn't. I just nodded. I didn't undo the boundaries. I didn't erase the consequences. But I accepted the apology without using it as leverage, without demanding more from him than he was able to give. Mercy didn't mean pretending nothing had happened. It meant clarity about what had happened and choosing not to weaponize it. I thought about what I'd learned in those prayers during training, during the hardest moments. To be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. James had written that, and it had always seemed impossible until I needed it. And I thought about Micah's words about what the Lord requires, to act justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly. I didn't need to perform forgiveness for an audience. I didn't need to make it easy for him or wrap it in pretty words. I just needed to mean it when I said I accepted what he was offering, flawed and incomplete as it was. That was enough. The relationships didn't heal overnight. Some didn't heal at all. Mom and Paige took longer, much longer. Mom sent a few more messages over the following months, each one shorter and more resigned than the last. Eventually, they stopped. Paige, I didn't hear from again. The silence there was complete, absolute, the kind that makes it clear there's nothing left to say. But something shifted. Dad and I met for coffee a few more times. Not often, maybe once every 2 months. The conversations were careful, bounded by the understanding that some things couldn't be undone. But they were real, more real than anything we'd had before. Extended family mostly stayed away. Some sent cards on holidays, generic messages that carefully avoided mentioning the meeting or the trust or anything substantive. Others I never heard from again. The group chat stayed muted. I stopped explaining myself, stopped trying to make people understand why I'd done what I'd done. If they wanted to believe I was selfish or cruel or vindictive, that was their choice. I knew what had actually happened. I knew what I had protected and why. The assets themselves became what they were always supposed to be. Not symbols of family worth or bargaining chips or proof of who mattered more. Just responsibilities. Numbers on statements. Accounts that needed managing. Properties that needed maintenance. I thought about all the years I'd signed away pieces of myself for the sake of harmony. All the times I'd folded because someone louder insisted I should. All the moments I'd let go of something that mattered because it was easier than standing firm. All the times I'd made myself smaller so someone else could feel bigger. I thought about how much of my life I'd spent trying to earn something I'd never been offered, trying to prove I deserved space in rooms that would never meant to include me, trying to be quiet enough, compliant enough, easy enough that maybe finally they'd see me as valuable. And I realized that the proof, the documentation, the authority designation, none of it would have mattered if I hadn't been willing to use it. My grandmother had given me the tools, but I'd had to pick them up. The trust protected the money, but I had to protect myself. Looking back now, I understand what that meeting was really about. It wasn't about $9.8 million. It was about whether I believed I deserved to hold on to something that was mine. Whether I believed my voice mattered as much as theirs. Whether I believed I had the right to say no. They'd spent my whole life teaching me I didn't. My grandmother had spent her last act teaching me I did. Boundaries aren't betrayal. That's what I learned. They're not cruelty. They're not punishment. They're just the truth, stated clearly, held firmly, even when everyone around you insists you're wrong. Clarity isn't mean. It's just clarity. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let the truth speak for itself. Not explained, not justified, not apologized for, just stated and held regardless of who disagrees. If you've ever been in a room like that, with people who assumed your silence meant agreement, I hope you find your proof. Whatever form it takes, I hope you find the thing that lets you say no and mean it. I hope you find your voice, even if it's quiet, even if it shakes, even if everyone else is louder. And I hope you use it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, subscribe for more.